Welcome to Project Insight's Professional Development Series. Today's session, From Founder-Led Growth to Scale-Ready Business Strategy, is part one of two and is designed for founders and growing organizations that are starting to feel the strain of success. In the early stages of business, growth is often fueled by speed, instinct, and constraint problem solving. The founder holds a vision, makes a decision, and keeps everything moving. But as teams grow, those same strengths become bottlenecks, which can lead to shifting priorities, communication breakdown, unclear ownership, and projects that just seem to not get completed. A few housekeeping notes. Everyone will be on mute. Please feel free to use the chat as we go along. Today's session is good for one PDU. You will need to stay until the end of the session for that, and will be sent those before the end of the week. This video will also be accessible via this recording link. Today, we have Steve West, CEO of Project Insight, and Diane Buckley-Altwies, CEO of Core Performance Concepts. Steve has spent more than 2 decades helping organizations improve project, program, and portfolio visibility, while Diane, amongst other topics, specializes in helping growing organizations translate strategy into focused execution through stronger operational processes, prioritization, and resource optimization. Are you guys ready to get started?
Definitely.
I think Wonderful. So hi, Steve. Hey, Matt. How are you guys doing today? Hello, everybody.
Doing great.
I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to this topic today because I think it can help a lot of organizations, small or large, because we all have growing pains at times. Hopefully we're always growing, so we're always going to have some sort of pains to address. But today, like Matt said, this is a 2-part series. So today we're going to cover topics about where some of those breakdowns happen, why sometimes founder-led execution slows down process. So what I want you to do as you're going through this is kind of say, okay, am I seeing this in my organization today? There's definitely root causes that we can work on. But we want to be able to identify when we may not be working as optimally as we would like. We'd also want to understand the difference between that reactive project management and a scale-ready operational structure, and also look at some of the foundational systems of places to improve, where you can improve that project visibility, accountability, and your consistency in your execution, which is what a lot of founders are looking for. Initially you have one client, you get the second client, you get the third client, and no 2 clients seem to be the same. So what you want to do is get to, right? Then you want to kind of get to that point where you're having that consistency and that trust that, every client onboarding is going to be a similar experience. And you have that kind of that flywheel where everything is working in sync. And then we'll talk about some practical strategies for you to take away and see where you want to kind of help improve your own organization. So you guys ready? And by
definitely.
The way, Steve, we're going to ask you for some feedback on your journey of being an entrepreneur in this whole process.
That sounds great. Ready to go.
Ready to go. All right. So, why do we see things starting to break when growing organizations? When you're a growing organization, I mean, you have maybe a handful of people you start with. Everybody's kind of working along arm in arm. Then all of a sudden you start feeling or having challenges that, cause you to be working overnight to try to solve something. So there's definitely things that happen in the process of a growing organization that are manageable and also fixable if we let them. So a lot of times early stage companies survive through those founder heroics. Now, we love heroes, but we don't necessarily always want to do heroics. The heroics is, all of a sudden a client's down, the entire organization is working, all the way through the night to kind of fix it. Mm-hmm. And that happens once in a while, not every day, but it does happen. And the founder might have to get involved. Has that ever happened to you, Steve?
Yes. And I think that even if you're not a startup or doing founder-like things, you can find some projects can end up being this way if they're like side projects or something a larger company's trying to get into. So some of these things still apply. But
Yeah,
yes, I've been there.
absolutely. Absolutely. Then the other area we see is in a small organization, you can pride yourself on being able to make decisions faster. Many of us have worked in both small organizations, large organizations, and in my experience, when I'm working with a lot, even my clients might be large organizations, or I've worked in a large organization, decision processing does seem to be slows down the larger the company gets. But that doesn't have to be, right? The benefit of being in a small organization, you can make those decisions pretty quickly because you basically look around the corner and say, hey, Steve, we need to do this. Can we do this? And Steve says yes or no, and you move on. In a larger organization, things start slowing down, but we can keep some of those decision-making processes faster, but we also don't want to open up those dependencies on individuals. So if you're always having to go look for Steve to answer the question and make the decision, that's going to be a problem as well.
Well, and I think that's something that founders can get, trapped in, or even managers, like we said before, if this is your pet project or something, you're going to not want to let go of all of those things. And it's the being able to make a fast decision is a great thing, but also, is that the right thing?
Right. And I would ask the question, like, why do you feel like you need to be involved in that particular project? Right. So it's a matter of trust. And we've had seminars and stuff and talk about trust. A lot of this and moving to that next level does have to deal in trust in your people, trust in the data, trust that the fact that somebody can make a good decision on their own without the founder's involvement. And that, again, it all comes down to trust. The next one is informal communication works well at small scale. Like I said, you got 5 people in the room, you're all on a chat together. There's just the 5 of you. You can share information. People are absorbing that information. One of the key things here in a smaller organization, you have more of that context of what's going on in the organization. The larger companies, as you get more and more people, not every role has all of the context that's needed to be able to do their job effectively. So in the smaller organizations, you have that, but as you grow, how do you keep that knowledge sharing happening when you know that people are a bit removed from that conversation? So that's a very important thing to think about too as you're growing. And what worked with 3 people ends up failing at 10. We all know our communication channel formula, where if I have 3 people on a team, I've got 3 communication channels. And if I have 10 people on a team, that grows exponentially to like 45 people. So if I have 3 people on my team, I only have to talk to 3 people. If I've got 10 people on my team, if I'm going to have the same communication to everyone on that team, it ends up being 45 communication channels that you have to manage. So
right.
The effort is significantly larger as you grow.
Definitely. I mean, you're not going to have one-on-one conversations with every single person. When you're tiny, you can just do that.
Right. And that's where a lot of that context gets lost, because we don't take the time to do that level of communication with everybody in the organization. So how do you put systems in place and processes in place to help that understanding? And then founders do become bottlenecks without realizing it sometimes. Not that you, Steve, but I have seen where, I've had a founder where he would make a lot of the decisions. Every once in a while, somebody would try to make a decision, and then the founder would find out that the decision they made, and if he didn't like it, he would change it on the fly. And sometimes that's in front of the client, which then makes a whole nother challenge when clients start feeling like the only person to make the decision is the founder. The founder's trying to help, but they're actually hurting when they're disagreeing or changing the decisions from the team that made the decision.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Yeah, and I think a lot of founders tend to be really optimistic people and maybe underestimate how long things take or how difficult things are. I mean, you want to be optimistic. We've talked about this in project management in general. As a project manager, you want to be optimistic. So that's a fine line between coming off, negative when you're just trying to be more efficient.
Yeah, the example that I've seen a lot is where the project team tells the client, well, that's going to take some time to do. And then the client talks to the founder and the founder says, oh, that's easy. Let me take care of it. And you just circumvented the trust between the project team and the client when the founder might be thinking that they're doing a favor because they're helping that client immediately. That's a very common thing that I've seen in small businesses, small technology businesses.
I think, though, the same way that all of these principles scale from project management at large organizations to what, just fundamentals of what you should be doing at your startup, that's one of those ones that does the same way with that, right? Where sometimes it's maybe not a founder they go to, but it's somebody else within the organization as well.
Department head.
So, exactly.
Yeah.
Just anybody else, right? Just circumvents the situation.
Yeah.
So.
It's just, it is a growth pain. Period.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier is that this doesn't just apply to startups, but it can apply to small project teams that are doing stealth work within a company. You can still have all these same issues.
Absolutely. Exactly. Absolutely. And it kind of leads into this particular topic, which is the myth of everyone knows what's going on. How many people in the audience today have worked on a project that lasted more than 6 months? And in the middle of that project, you had to change out people, new people. I mean,
I think everybody.
Right. I mean, the answer should be everybody, right? Well, those new people come into this environment and we forget that they haven't had the benefit of the conversation from the beginning. They may not know the vision. That's why that charter is so important. They may hear pieces of the whole context, but not all of it. And so when that happens, they can make mistakes. And growing companies forget that you have more people to talk to. And we think that, if I said it once, everybody understands. But that's not true. And I'll tell you why. Years ago, when I first started teaching, I wanted to learn how to be a good instructor, right? So I went to a class and at this university, because I was going to be teaching in the university. And the instructor on the very last day said, and at the end of your class, if your students remember 25% of what you taught them, you've done a really good job. And I just paused. And I'm like, how many times was I in a meeting and I'm just talking or somebody's just talking and we just assume that everybody heard everything? I mean, that was a big eye-opening, moment for me. And I see that a lot with people that are, growing their businesses where they've said it once, but they don't realize that they need to say it over and over and over again because you're not going to hear everything. And if you don't hear everything and you don't totally understand the context and what you're trying to accomplish, there will be missed deadlines. There will be shifting priorities. There will be duplicate work. There will be unclear ownership, and whenever I feel or I sense that communication hasn't happened, I kind of say time out, let's make sure we're clear here because I don't want to do duplicate work. I don't want to waste my time. I don't want you wasting your time. So let's make sure we're sure as to what we're trying to accomplish, and then we can move on. It's much easier to kind of stop and pause because what happens if you do duplicate work?
You waste time.
Right.
You waste time, right? You waste money. It's like, why would I be doing that? So the acknowledgement that not everybody knows what's going on is critical for helping organizations scale. The more you spend time on articulating your goals, your vision, the better. And if you're communicating well to your managers, you want them to make sure they're communicating well to their employees and their teams. So that's what's critical here. And then, so if you're not having good communication throughout, if you're not, articulating that vision, you're going to have some challenges. And then a lot of times you hear that as I'm growing, as an organization, I'm growing, the projects seem to be taking a longer time. Again, there's value in process. I'm a big proponent of process, but I'm not going to do process for process's sake. But there's value in process if you want to have that consistency that we talked about earlier, right? So projects start slowing down for a couple of reasons. One is we're trying to do too many things. If you're a small organization, we bring on one other person. I don't know how many times I've seen senior executives say, oh, let's do this project without any concept or consideration to resource and capacity planning. So that happens a lot. And especially in small growing companies where, oh my God, I got my next client. And they're all kind of a little different, so every single one of those adds complexity to the team that's trying to deliver. So you might have too many priorities going on.
Well, I think that happens to even bigger companies. That can happen to,
Totally.
That happens a lot.
It totally does. Yeah.
That's probably one of the number one things.
Yeah. Again, not looking at capacity planning. Yeah. Small companies not doing the right projects, not prioritizing the right projects could totally have your business fail because you didn't focus on the right thing. In a large company, that happens a lot. And what ends up happening is, margins are impacted, deliveries are delayed, etc. Constant firefighting. This is one of the things that if you don't have good processes in place, you will probably see some firefighting going on. And what I mean by firefighting is there's an issue, like you've been developed for a client, you deliver it to the client, there's an issue with the client. Oh my God, there's a problem. Everybody gathers together to fix the problem. And they fix the problem, but they don't necessarily fix the root cause, right? Mm-hmm. Then we move on to the next project. And then there's another little fire that happens, but we don't ever take the time to really fix the root cause. Larger organizations usually have a better process for getting to there. If you don't have a good process for fixing root causes, you're going to have a constant firefighting activity going on. Mm-hmm. That ever happen?
Of course.
Yeah, both internal and external, right, Steve? I mean, that happens with clients that we work with who are doing similar things, right? Where they're, feel like they can't do anything long term because they're here and then they're there and over here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you have clients, it makes it extra possibility for firefighting because you're just kind of taking on what's going on with them, and there's a lot more things outside of your control. So I think from our perspective, we just try to make sure that we're doing what we plan to do. But yeah, firefighting from things that aren't even our fault necessarily can take away.
Yeah, we always plan optimistically, like you said. We plan optimistically, think we're not going to have any problems, but there will be problems, and if you put too many priorities on your plate and you don't have the time to do that retrospective, to do those root cause analysis, to fix root causes, you'll be in this cycle of constant firefighting. So adding some sort of process around that, will be important as you grow.
Definitely.
and again, we keep hitting on our poor founders, but that it happens. Having that dependency on founder intervention. They probably know the product the best. They know the system the best. They know the goals of the organization the best. They've been living, breathing this for as long as they've been, a founder, and it goes both ways. Is the founders need to be able to delegate, and the people being delegated to need to feel comfortable that they can make decisions. So if that's in place, you can keep speed, the speed of your projects going well. If it's not in place, if the founders don't trust the team, then the team always has to go find the founder. Now, if the founder is traveling or in meetings or board meetings or whatever, that delays your project duration. So that building that trust and having less founder intervention on individual projects will be best for everybody.
Yeah, and this gets, I think having good plans, having your project plans put together well, making sure your team is trained on what your processes are, that can help a lot with this.
Yep. And then the last reason that projects tend to slow is because they stall between departments. So as companies grow, you're going to have different departments, and those departments are going to put their plans in place each year. If you don't have a good process for making sure everything is aligned from a strategic standpoint, you'll have disconnects between departments. So maybe you started on a project and didn't realize you needed to work with the accounting department more. Well, that working on this project, wasn't on the radar of accounting. And if they take time away from their initiatives, then they're not going to succeed. So you end up with this conflict between departments, which now you're trying to get resources. Now you're trying to reorganize. Now so this all just takes time and it slows down everything. So it's really important for founders to really look at their entire organization as a portfolio of activities and projects, to where everything should be aligned and we have a good sense as to the priorities of those initiatives. So if we know that initiative 1 is the most important thing for the organization, then every department should be aligned with that to know that initiative 1 is the most important thing. So if they've got initiative A, B, and C, they're okay as long as, they help out on making sure, initiative 1 gets taken care of. So that strategic discussion, that strategic planning, again, doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to happen, right? So there's a lot of process that we can put in place to make sure that things don't slow down as you're growing. But it doesn't have to be complicated processes.
Yeah.
So when we think about the difference between founder-led and scale-ready, there's kind of a culture that needs to adapt to be able to get to a scale-ready kind of environment. In founder-led, you've got a lot more tribal knowledge. You've got a lot more interruptions because I can look around the corner and I can ask Matt a question. I can text on our group chat. I can get my answers pretty fast. I'm reactive, a lot more reactive, because maybe, it's critical to have these first 3 clients be very successful. So I might be more reactive. And I have an informal accountability because I know where you all live, right? We've been working hand in hand, but I'm going to show up at your doorstep if you didn't do your job that we needed. And it's a much more informal, accountability. But when you start getting to scale ready, processes do have to be documented. You do have to have some level of workflows. You need to start delegating that ownership. You need to have that strategic prioritization, and you have to have that visible accountability. So, Stephen, from your perspective, on the right-hand side, on the scale-ready side, what are the top 2 things that have helped you kind of grow your business? What would you say?
Well, I think from I would say just processes that were documented. We started when we first started the company. We set up the how the coding would be and what the design was going to be, and we put that out pretty well right out of the gate. So all the engineers and everybody here has a system and for doing things. And I think one of the things we didn't really touch on, but AI can really help with a lot of this now, because you don't have to necessarily, sit down and write it all down in a more, you can have visuals and meetings and have AI help you format that data. And also your AI can be pointed at your processes to help answer those questions. So this I think is something that the new technology can make that be a lot easier for people. The lift to do that is going to be a lot lower now.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much going on with AI right now. It's crazy. It's mind-boggling. But it's one of those things where it's like, just like we were saying, is you don't want to like go too far. You want to be able to take advantage of that, but you need to trust it, right? And so it's the same kind of thing. Can I delegate to my AI to do some of this stuff? And there's a trust issue to it.
Definitely. I mean, you got to review them. It's like having employees, sometimes depending on you're going to ask it to do things, and they make mistakes a lot. So, but it does speed it up.
It speeds it up. But then are we good at kind of reviewing it and finding problems?
Well, I
think that's where we're all going to have to learn. So just kind of summarizing, like, we're not trying to get more bureaucracy in here. We're trying to, pinpoint some areas that we can focus on from a process standpoint. So, and we're going to jump into Project Insight here in a second to show you some of that. But having some sort of project prioritization process in place would be number one. It's like knowing which ones are the most important projects for the organization from your strategic plan. Also, owner and accountability framework, because founders and owners of companies don't want to let go unless they know they can trust the person that's taking it on. So how do you provide that accountability? How do you, monitor that accountability? And you want people that are willing to take that ownership. And then the third part is, from a founder's perspective, how can I have visibility into what's going on, and only have things escalated to me that really need to be escalated to me, and how can I kind of have some visibility into some of that decision-making process, so that we are not miscommunicating or providing multiple communications to one person, which adds more confusion to the organization. So I'm going to let Matt take it away for a few minutes and kind of show some of the stuff with Project Insight.
Yeah, I think, Diane, like you were mentioning it doesn't need to be fancy. You just need to have a place to put it, as far as that's concerned. And Project Insight allows for a wide range of organizational size and sophistication as far as who the users can be. And that's all controlled via what we call add-ons, which are kind of the feature classes of what you might use. So if you do want to start tracking approvals from a governance, right? So I don't need to involve Steve in every decision we make. Diane, You're going to be okay for me to say yes to this one. I can turn that feature set on and then get that approval and let that be consolidated within Project Insight. Or it can just be a really, even a high level tool at which a place where a founder or the appropriate level here, I'm on a program or portfolio view of what Diane was saying. I want to see the landscape of what we're working on. I can do that here. I can see all of the projects that we have in play or the initiatives.
I can see who's responsible for it.
Exactly. I can see who I need to have a conversation with if I feel uncomfortable about something. I have these currently grouped by the priority that they're in, so that way I can really make sure to keep my eye on the things that we've designated as critical, as opposed to maybe the low-hanging, the low pieces that I'm not as stressed about or worried about.
And just knowing what those projects are is really important for the founder as well. So they know that everything's accounted for. Again, a portfolio of projects, it's like everything's accounted for. I know who owns it. That's kind of peace of mind.
Yeah. And we find that, when we bring new clients in, whether they're startups or even just regular traditional businesses that have been in business for years, this information ends up being fragmented a lot of times because, one division will keep a spreadsheet and then another division will use a tool and then another group will do it a different way. So in order to get a report that just at a high level, what are all the projects going on in my program or my portfolio or across the whole organization, that ends up being like a fire drill exercise for the project management team to put that together all the time.
I once going back to the conversation we had earlier about not putting process in only when it's viable. There was one time that the owner was like, well, I want to have the project manager create a report every Friday on every project that's going on. And I'm like, no, not unless you're willing to, and this was before we had tools like Project Insight, not unless you're willing to read every single one of them every Friday.
Right.
This would have been awesome, right? To be able to say, okay, well, fine.
Right.
We've got the data. Now let's just roll it up to the top and you can just go click and look at it yourself. And I don't need to create another report.
Well, I think that that's one of the big wins of using a tool like ours is that it's real time. I don't need to, do this massive exercise or, make poor Janet sit in her office for the next, half day trying to figure everything out for us, right? It's all here. If I need an extra data point, all I have to do is come up to the top and right click, and I can insert things like, who's the department in charge of this work? So then I can understand, knowing that Katie's here, but it's an operations department and maybe Bob's in charge of operations. So I can now go to Bob and say, hey, what's going on here as far as that's concerned? All of these points are right here and ready for anybody to go to this page and, access. So the other part of the equation is that this is live, so I can edit these pieces here. So if we are only tracking the high level data points, start and end, what's the status, what's the phase, I can do that all right here. But I can also come in and comment and collaborate with others. So if I need something from somebody, I can ping them. They can then be notified. But this provides that one channel for us to collaborate on rather than the thread that the three of us have, or the thread that Diane and I have, or the one that Steve and I have, or that you two have. Exactly, right? It can send the notification to Slack or Teams to tell you that you should go here to collaborate, right? But it gives one central place to actually look at it as a whole. And then if you're like a lot of people and you like to look at things in different ways, or even just based on your own kind of logic, you can look at this over time on like a Gantt chart where I can see when it started, when it's complete, where we should be today. These diamonds are things that we've designated as milestones or like kind of critical items along the workflow. If you're tracking that, you can see you don't need to, but it allows you to get as kind of granular as you may want to at this level of looking at these projects.
Which is one of the reasons why owners and founders have a hard time delegating, because they don't have that real-time data to look at.
Right, exactly. If everything I do is manage, I'm trying to find on my sticky notepad on my desk, it's a lot harder for Steve to know what's going on here and to feel confident that we're executing right. So
yeah. And here's where we're doing this exercise by just getting your projects into a tool like Project Insight is that now having data stratified and organized, when you do want to run it against the AI, it'll actually have better context. So if you've got multiple different formats, multiple different sets of data, multiple different spreadsheets, you can throw all that at your AI, but the AI is going to get confused because you haven't actually organized your information in a way that's consistent. So This is a huge first step, is just getting your project list, getting what it is, getting the dates, getting the health, getting what status it is. There's all these attributes put into the tool, That's step one right there. And it's a lot easier than people think.
Oh, it's real straightforward. You just select them, and then you can even bulk import all of your projects based on what you already use.
Yeah.
The other one, Diane, that you were talking about, I know, Steve, we do this internally, and obviously lots of organizations do, and that's why we have this feature here, right? But this idea of prioritization via projects. So, with the appropriate permissions, I can come in here and designate, no, this is high, this is lower, however that is. That then goes to that project designate for priority, and everybody can have visibility into it. That can even be trickled down into, which we'll talk about in a minute, but actual assignments within these project pieces.
That's right. I mean, just edit one of the views and it'll automatically edit everywhere. That's a big deal, instead of 3 spreadsheets,
Which goes to that communication and context. It's like, well, that project isn't a priority. I know it's not a priority. And then somebody says, but it is a priority. Joe told me it was a priority.
Yeah.
Now it's like, wait a minute. The president's the only one that can move these priorities around, and look at he did.
Right. Or the department head, or the whatever level you might be at, right? That's the nice thing, is that delegation web can happen based on permissions and attributes like department or role or otherwise.
And it captures who did it too.
Exactly. Yeah. All of that's tracked, right within it. Projects can just be simply these data points, right? I can create a project to add to this list right here. That is just the idea of who are we serving, what roles in charge, what pieces we're doing. Projects can also be, and we'll talk about it, deployed as templates, which have predefined processes. So as Diane was mentioning, you want to start defining your workflows. You can build those into templates and then, reapply those time and time again every time you do that type of work, or modify as you may need. So,
yeah, and one of the audience members mentioned that she'll go back into the project afterwards to go see what, was going on. So once it's in here digitally, now you can even, once it's archived, you can go back and look at it as well. So there's a lot of reasons to go down this road of getting your stuff online, putting it in a tool, getting it smoothed out so that you can compare apples to apples.
Right. The other few views, Diane and we were kind of chatting beforehand about, what do leaders want to see? And, it's the idea of these program or portfolio views where I have these predefined roll-ups of the data that we want to see. They often want to see things like project reports, which is really just, very similar to what we were just looking at. The nice thing about all of our reports is if that person says, I want it every Friday, via Project Insight's schedule feature, I can say, great, here, I'm going to send it to you every Friday. You can either get a link right here, or I can send it as an Excel file and give you access to whatever points you want to look at. These pieces can also be dynamic, to where via the filter, I can come in and say, you know what, I only want to see the ones that I'm in charge of. Or that, Susan's in charge of, when Susan logs in and looks at this report. Awesome. So it makes it handy. The other part of the equation is that each of my resources, have a certain amount of capacity that they can take on based on the project, based on assignments, and we can even see that. So in this instance, I'm looking at everybody. Diane mentioned accountants, which kind of worked out well earlier. I can peep in on my accountant team and say, hey, do you guys have the bandwidth to take on a little bit more work for this new initiative that Steve said is critical, right? And we need to get in. You can come in here and see the other pieces that these members are working on, and then run what we call a what-if simulation to bring that on and decide if you can, in fact, do work or not based on budgets, based on priorities, based on, just allocation of resources.
Yeah, and that goes to that whole point about having, constant additions to priorities and additional projects. And, you can only, you only have the capacity to deliver on so much. So you have to be selective as to what you're going to work on.
Well, also which ones I think that's the key. You mentioned earlier on, depending on your business level, is the right projects could be make or break for the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you may want to factor that out based on, something like this where I'm looking at, weekly allocation, but we, often could do a budget report monthly to understand my, cash flow on all of the work we're doing over time. So, all of these reports can be turned into a dashboard, and this is often what lots of team members, executive included, will want to look at, is something like this where they can choose the layout, they can choose what reports they see, but then they're looking at everything on one screen as opposed to going from one to another. It just gives more flexibility in what you prefer to do. The other part that's handy here within Project Insight is I have my work list, which provides me with a combination of all of my relevant assignments, which can include things like task with priority on them, but also approvals like we were mentioning. So if we have these predefined workflows that we say, this is how projects start, this is how projects close, this is how I get more money, this is how anything works, we can build those in and then execute on those as well, right within Project Insight.
Yeah, awesome.
So
and I think the real key is that, again, once you load the data in here, you don't have to build these. All these views that Matt's showing are just
there
away.
Right. And loading the data is as simple as importing it from Excel if that's what you have on the project level, or you can do it in bulk as well. So
and again, it's like having a tool that has all that data that you can trust is one of the key ways that founders can get out of the detail,
right?
And actually be more effective in what they're supposed to be bringing to the table. And they need to be out there talking to venture capitalists, or getting funding, or they need to be talking to clients, or they need to be out there promoting their business from a marketing perspective. Not necessarily in the long term, the founder shouldn't be working on the bug fixes.
Right.
That's the ideal. Right?
Yeah, I'm here on a project plan where I can see this overdue task, right? And I can see, who's in charge, who's on it, and kind of the general status of that. I, as the founder, should not be looking at this level of granularity to say, hey, what's going on here with this person here, right? I should be looking where we were, which is at that high level, to say, hey, these are my initiatives. Here's what we're behind on based on the KPIs that are happening within the project. But at the end of the day, I'm going to talk to Susan about that one because she's in charge of it. I don't need to go down to the resource themselves, right? So
yeah, and that's what normally if you're not using a tool or you're trying to do it in Excel, you end up having to double, triple, quadruple enter the data, and it just is a lot slower.
Yep.
Who's broken an Excel formula by entering something incorrectly on one of those complicated ones before? Yeah, same. Anyway.
Great.
Although Excel's an awesome tool, it's not a collaboration tool.
That's true. Agreed. Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right. Well, let's continue on here. We've done a great conversation and some great features for people to consider within Project Insight. So let's just kind of summarize where if we don't have good organizational portfolio and project execution procedures and processes, where do we find those hidden costs? And especially in growing, scaling companies where revenue is key, right? If you're trying to make it in this world, you're trying to build this business, and you can't be wasting time on duplicate work. You can't be wasting time on sitting around waiting for things. You can't be wasting time. So revenue is a critical thing that that having some good procedures in place will benefit from. You also, the other cost we have is team burnout. Like we were saying before, there's heroics that people end up jumping through hoops to make sure that things are fixed and things are moving forward. But you don't need that all the time, and you can't sustain that. And from a long-term perspective, And, similarly, the founder exhaustion, it gets to a point where it's like, did I make the right choice and want to build this business? I don't know. Sometimes that happens. Customers get frustrated too. This is where I was saying that, every client is critical. And one of the things I've seen in growing companies is once they start getting a number of clients, they have their tiered clients. They got their A tier, B tier, C tier clients. And those C tier clients end up getting ignored, right? And every client should have, should be appreciated, in my opinion. And because clients, and we're going to talk about this in the next session here, existing clients bring you a lot more revenue if you really manage them well. So I see a lot of customer frustration because these small organizations, they're always working on the next big client, the next big client, the next big client. And the clients that have signed up with them and have been there for a while end up getting ignored. So you start seeing some customer frustration, and you'll see customer attrition. You also, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm agreeing.
Yeah. I mean, it's so critical in those early stages to make sure those customers feel appreciated. And it's critical long-term too. How many people like how your wireless cell phone vendors treat you if you've been there a long time?
Yeah, right.
They'll have a pain point that they have never solved, but people still keep going, right? Anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. And then loss of trust internally. So when those decisions get being made and circumventing somebody else's decision point, people end up not wanting to do the work. They just kind of continue to defer to the founder. Like, yep, you know what? If I say anything now, I'm just going to be told no later. So I need to go talk to Joe. He has to make the decision. Everything has to go through Joe, and the trust within the whole organization starts failing. So that's a huge cost, and that will certainly minimize your ability to scale. And then the slower product delivery, when you are constantly making changes to your product that aren't strategic. So we're going to talk about that more too in the next session as well, how product delivery is critical to you scaling. And, chaos from the very beginning might feel productive because it's exciting, but if you don't put the processes in place, it's going to end up becoming very expensive for your organization, and you may not make it.
Well, and the other thing too, when you're thinking about starting to change your processes or improve your processes, whether you're a startup or not, you just one step at a time. You don't have to solve the whole thing all at once.
Exactly.
I think a lot of times
Agreed.
we get ahead of ourselves and want to have everything figured out. But if you just do it a little at a time as you go, then it's not as big of a cost to get set up.
And that's a really good point, Steve, because when I'm working with startups, I first want to find out what the skill sets are within the organization. So, the founder might be the best person to manage customers right now, might be, and maybe there's a better person around the development team, and, or maybe that founder is best in handling the support for the time being until we can build the team correctly. Finding out, that skill set and making sure you've got your people in the right place, because you're going to want to fill the gaps with good resources, but you don't need to overlap on those resources as you're scaling, because then that's another area for waste. So find out who, where their skills are and leverage them in the best way possible. So what we're going to do here, we're almost to the end here. So a couple practical steps you can take to implement immediately. To Steve's point, you don't have to do everything at once. We can do it baby steps. The QR code here is an assessment that I created that might help you kind of evaluate your organization. And if you want any kind of guidance with regard to where maybe to start, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help. But some of the things that you can do as a result of this webinar today, define your top 3 priorities weekly. Now, granted, things can change, but what you don't want to do is be schizophrenic and change 3 every single week. But what are your top 3 priorities? Are they still the top 3 priorities? What are we trying to accomplish? Think of it like like your sprints. Like what are the things we want to make sure we're accomplishing each week? But you can't be changing it every single week. You have to be consistent from that perspective. The second thing is to reduce your communication ambiguity, which we started the conversation early on today. Repeat, repeat, repeat. If people are only hearing 25% of what you said, and you're only talking to maybe 10% of your organization, you do the math. How many people in the organization actually heard what you said? It's just a math problem, right?
Not enough is the answer.
Enough, right?
Well, I think
25% of what I said, 10% of the company. Yeah, it's a very small number.
Yeah, and I think with the tools these days, we have a tendency to, I just posted it on Teams, and you're done with, you think you're done with your part, but in reality, the follow-up needs to happen. Make sure everyone actually heard.
Because the next time I look at Teams, it's an hour after you posted it, and there's 400 other things there.
I know, right? And that's that's part of it, is that we are ever increasingly being inundated. When I say we, people, all people are just constantly being inundated about all kinds of things. So, it seems like, oh yeah, that's faster, but maybe it's not. Maybe turning your phone off for a while and turning your Teams off for a while to get a couple things done, going back to, the way it would have been years ago.
Yeah. Well, now with the onset of AI, everybody's like, well, did you check chat?
Of course.
The third thing is assign ownership and stick with it. Again, you've got to have some trust in the individuals you're giving that ownership to, but you've got to let them, own it. And you know what? You might be surprised. Sometimes who you're giving ownership to might have a different way to approach things, and
a better way
than you. Right?
Definitely. Yep. Well, especially if you're thin, there's no way you're going to be able to do everything. So.
Right. And if they make a mistake, they're going to make mistakes. It's like, okay, you can't take it on again.
Yeah, everyone's going to, and just like with our projects, you should build in extra slack, build in for mistakes, because they will happen. Yep. It's how you react to them is the key.
Yep, got to let them learn and own it, because they will make mistakes, especially if you haven't been communicating well. Right?
Yeah.
And then resist that urge to jump in. Your role as a founder, as an owner of a company, and even as a project manager, it's, if something does happen, let's not jump in and do for people. Let's figure out, why they didn't do it, appropriately, and let's train them. People are never going to, they'll never be, let them fix it, because that's the best way to learn. Let them fix it.
Yeah, for sure.
It might take a little bit longer, but that's okay. So we're at the end, and like I said, we're going to be getting to part 2, and we're going to delve a lot more into resources and clients and product, and kind of bring a full circle of things that organizations need to be thinking about as they scale.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks, Diane. Appreciate it.
QR code is there to scan for your PDU. There we go. Wonderful. Diane, that was great. I'm really excited for the part 2. I love when we do the series.
Oops.
They build up so well on one another. So
we're going to talk about the talent shift, talk about sales, and a sustainable product environment. So looking forward to that.
Those are great topics.
Yeah.
Join July 15th for that.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Yep. All right. This is awesome, guys. Thanks. Good seeing y'all. Take care. We'll see you next month.